Imagine standing at the altar. The room is alive with quiet excitement. Family members wipe tears from their eyes. Friends exchange knowing smiles. Every seat is filled. Every face is turned toward you. This is supposed to be one of the happiest days of your life. And by every outward measure, it is. The music swells. The celebrant smiles. Someone whispers that you make a beautiful couple. Then your eyes meet the person across from you. And beneath the carefully rehearsed vows, beneath the expensive clothes, beneath the applause that hasn't happened yet, you hear a thought you've spent months trying to silence. This is a mistake, not because they're a bad person, and not because you've stopped caring, but because somewhere along the way you stopped asking yourself what you wanted. You ask yourself one final question: can I really do this? For a brief moment, another possibility appears. You could walk away. You could endure the confusion, the whispers, the disappointment, the anger, and could shatter every expectation that has led to this moment. But then another thought arrives, one that's much louder. Think about your parent. Think about their family. Think about everyone who traveled to be here. Think about the embarrassment. Think about how much this will hurt them. And suddenly, your own happiness begins to feel strangely insignificant. Not because it is insignificant, but because you spent so long treating people's disappointment as more important than your own. So, you smile. You say the vows, everyone applauds, the photographs are beautiful, the guests tell you how lucky you are, and life moves on. Years later, someone asks a question that seems impossible to answer. How did you end up living a life you never wanted? They imagine there must have been a single catastrophic mistake, one terrible decision, one dramatic turning point. But lives rarely drift off course that way. More often, they are redirected by countless invincible decisions. The promotion you accepted because saying no would have seemed ungrateful. The relationship you stayed in because leaving would have broken someone's heart. The career you chose because it made your parents proud. The opinion you kept to yourself. The boundary you never set. The apology you offered simply for having needs. Each decision seemed too small to matter. Each one was made to avoid disappointing someone else. Until one day, you discover that the person you've disappointed most consistently is yourself. And perhaps that's the greatest irony. Many of us spend our lives believing we're making free choices, when in reality, we're making carefully calculated attempts to prevent other people from feeling disappointed. The life we call ours slowly becomes a monument to everyone else's expectation. So before we ask how someone ends up trapped in a life they never chose, perhaps we should ask a different question. Why does disappointing a stranger, a friend, a parent, or even someone we love often feel more unbearable than betraying ourselves? Your friend asks to borrow money you cannot spare. A parent asks yet for another favor on your only day off. Your employer asks you to stay late on your anniversary night. Your partner wants something you simply do not have the energy to give. Instantly, you say yes, and instantly, your stomach sinks. Why does saying one simple word, no, feel physically painful? Why does the prospect of disappointing someone else feel quite literally like a death sentence? To understand this agonizing reflex, we must look at our evolutionary history. Humans evolved in tight-knit tribes. In ancient archaic environments, being rejected by the group was not just an emotional injury, it was a death sentence. Solitude meant starvation or predation. Consequently, our brains evolved to treat social harmony as a survival imperative. Renowned psychologists Naomi Eisenberger and Matthew Lieberman advanced this understanding through social pain theory. Using fMRI neuroimaging, their research revealed that social rejection and exclusion activates the anterior cingulate cortex, the exact same region of the brain involved in processing physical pain. When you contemplate disappointing someone, your nervous system does not clearly distinguish between a social threat and a physical threat. To your ancient survival-driven brain, the "annoyed with me" triggers the same alarm bells as "a predator is outside the cave." We literally hurt because our biology equates disapproval with mortality. When we operate entirely from this survival mode, several psychological distortions take hold. Conditional positive regard. We internalize the belief that we are only valuable when we are useful. The spotlight effect. We drastically overestimate how much others are focusing on and judging our flaws or boundaries. Negativity bias. We hyper-focus on a single frown, completely ignoring a room full of acceptance. By constantly abandoning your own boundaries to preserve the comfort of others, you prevent the development of self-determination theories called pillars: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. True connection cannot exist where authentic self-expression is forbidden. To many, disapproval feels like death, so we seek its opposites to survive. This is where we become ensnared in the approval addiction. Think of approval as a highly potent drug. A polite smile, a compliment, even a thank you and a nod of acceptance floods your brain with dopamine. Through operant conditioning, we learn to chase this reward. Initially, you help others for goodness sake, as we've been taught from childhood. But over time, intermittent reinforcement, the unpredictable high of finally pleasing an unpredictable parent, employer, or partner, turns a healthy desire for connection into a compulsive dopamine loop. Eventually, the internal compass breaks. Instead of asking, "What do I want?" you begin to ask, "What keeps everyone else happy?" When external validation becomes your sole source of safety, approval slowly morphs into your very identity. You do not just perform acts of service, you become a people pleaser. In trauma literature, this is recognized as the fawning response, an automated nervous system defense mechanism that placates threats to maintain a fragile sense of security. You do not wake up one day deciding to erase your own personality. You are trained to do it. This training relies heavily on the theory of operant conditioning, posited by American psychologist B.F. Skinner, a learning process where behaviors are shaped by rewards and punishments. When you say yes to a difficult request, the reward is immediate. You receive a sigh of relief, praise, or at the very least, the absence of conflict. Your brain notes this success. It learns that self-sacrifice equals safety and reward. This loop becomes unbreakable due to intermittent reinforcement. If people rewarded you every single time you pleased them, the habit might eventually lose its urge. But human behavior is erratic. Sometimes your boss praises your overtime work. Sometimes they ignore it. Sometimes a critical parent is thrilled by your sacrifice. Sometimes they demand more. This unpredictability creates a powerful psychological trap. Just like a gambler pulling the lever on a slot machine, you keep giving, sacrificing, and saying yes, desperately chasing the next unpredictable hit of validation. You become trapped in a self-perpetuating dopamine loop. Eventually, this constant craving changes how you think. Your focus shifts entirely away from yourself. Instead of asking, "What do I want?" you ask, "What keeps everyone happy?" You stop checking in with your own body, your own exhaustion, and your own values. Your internal guidance system shuts down. You look entirely for external validation to determine if you are allowed to feel okay. If the people around you are smiling, you can breathe. If they are frowning, you are in immediate danger. The ultimate tragedy of the approval addiction is that it does not stop at your behavior. It slowly consumes your identity. When you spend decades adapting your shape to fit the emotional modes of other people, your true self atrophies. You lose track of your genuine preferences, your unique boundaries, and your anger. You no longer just perform helpful acts. You become the nice person, the reliable one, or the martyr. Your sense of self becomes entirely contingent on being useful. You do not exist as a separate human being with your own rights to say no. You exist only as a mirror reflecting back whatever compliance the world demands of you. You have traded your authenticity for a fragile drug-like peace. The people most likely to become trapped in this cycle are not necessarily weak-willed or foolish. They are usually the most compassionate, the most empathetic, the most responsible, the most sensitive. The tragic irony of this form of validation addiction is that the very qualities that make someone a deeply good person can also make them entirely exploitable. Your virtues are weaponized against you, turning your kindness into your very own prison. To understand why good people are uniquely vulnerable, we can look at the big 5 personality traits. In psychology, individuals high in the traits of agreeableness are naturally cooperative, trusting, and deeply invested in social harmony. They instinctively seek to minimize conflict and maximize cooperation. Combined with high levels of empathy, an agreeable person does not just see someone else's distress, they feel it. If a coworker is stressed or a partner is upset, it registers in the empathetic brain as a shared crisis. This creates an intense level of guilt-proneness for a highly conscientious and empathetic person. Causing disappointment triggers an immediate agonizing wave of internal guilt. You feel responsible for emotions that do not belong to you. To avoid the scorching pain of that guilt, you will gladly set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. This brings us to a darker reality. Manipulative, narcissistic, or simply self-absorbed people possess an unconscious radar for these specific traits. They do not necessarily sit down with a villainous plot. Instead, through trial and error, they learn exactly who they can lean on without facing resistance. They recognize your high agreeableness as an open door. They see your empathy as a tool they can manipulate. An exploitative person can instinctively sense your guilt-proneness. When they sigh loudly, look disappointed, or drop subtle hints about how much they are struggling, they are testing you. They know that your empathy will force you to step in, and your guilt will prevent you from backing out. Once a manipulative person locates a highly responsible, empathetic individual, a toxic symbiosis forms. They exploit a lens that they never have to manage their own discomfort, take full responsibility, or face their own failures. Why should they, when you are always standing by, ready to absorb their stress and fix their problems? You become a prisoner of your own high standards. You stay quiet because you are understanding. You over-deliver because you are responsible. You tolerate disrespect because you can see their perspective. In this prison, your best qualities are used as leverage. You are held hostage not by iron bars, but by your own deep desire to be a good, loving human being. You are trained to believe that protecting yourself is a form of cruelty. To truly understand why a 30-year-old adult collapses at the thought of a boundary, we have to look backward. We have to look at the child they used to be. Many adults who struggle with an addiction to approval learned a devastating lesson before they even knew how to tie their shoes. Love was conditional. In these families, affection, warmth, and safety were not free. They were earned currencies. The messages were rarely delivered as overt cruelty. Instead, they were woven into the everyday scripts of childhood. I'll be proud of you if you get straight A's. Don't embarrass me in front of the neighbors. Good children don't argue with their parents. Be a nice girl or boy and do what you're told. Stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about. To a developing child, these scripts are terrifying. According to attachment theory, a child requires a secure, predictable, emotional bond with a caregiver to develop a stable sense of self. When that bond is threatened by a parent's withdrawal of affection, the child experiences a profound survival panic. They quickly internalize a painful narrative. As I am not enough, I must perform, quiet my needs, and manage my parents' emotions to deserve love. This is what American humanistic psychologist Carl Ransom Rogers called conditional positive regard. The child learns to hide their authentic thoughts, their anger, and their sadness because those parts of them are rejected by the family unit. In the language of family systems theory, families operate like an emotional mobile. If one piece moves, everything shifts. To keep the peace in an unstable or demanding household, the child is forced into a specific role. The most damaging of these roles is parentification. This happens when the generational roles flip. Instead of the parent comforting the child becomes the emotional caretaker of the parent. They learn to read the room perfectly. They monitor the heavy footstep down the hallway. They learn to anticipate the parent's explosive anger or deep depression, stepping in to soothe, to quiet, or to perform, just to keep the family ecosystem from crashing down. Decades pass, the child grows up, they leave the house, get a job, and build a life, but the nervous system remembers. Years later, they are 30 years old, standing in an office or sitting across from a romantic partner. On paper, they are an adult, but internally, they are still that hyper-vigilant child, panicking at a slight shift in someone's tone of voice. They find themselves constantly apologizing for taking up space, for having an opinion, or for simply existing. When they want to say no, the ancient family system activates in their brain, whispering that a boundary will mean total abandonment. They are still performing for a ghost, desperately hoping that if they are just perfect enough, quiet enough, and compliant enough, they will finally be safe. Here is the huge point we must confront. Being nice is not always kindness. Sometimes it is an act of pure avoidance. When we unpack the behavior of the compulsive chronic pleaser, we find that the pleasant exterior is rarely about the other person's well-being. It is a protective shield designed to avoid the internal friction of existing as a separate human being. You are not saying yes out of a spirit of generosity. You are saying yes because you are desperately avoiding awkward conversations, rejection, confrontation, guilt. Under the guise of morality, niceness operates as a self-protective strategy. It is a transactional bargain. I will never make you uncomfortable so that you never make me feel unsafe. Because this strategy is rooted in fear rather than genuine care, it inevitably backfires. When you say yes to preserve a superficial calm, you do not actually eliminate conflict. You simply delay it, allowing it to gather interest. Sometimes saying yes hurts everyone. Consider how this structural dishonesty corrodes our most vital systems. The resentful spouse. They agree to every vacation, every social plan, and every domestic demand without complaint. But because their true desires are constantly suppressed, an icy silent resentment builds beneath the surface. They pull away emotionally, punishing their partner with a subtle, toxic distance that the partner cannot understand. The burned-out parent. They refuse to set boundaries with their children, desperate to always be the good, accommodating caretaker. They say yes to every whim, run themselves ragged and suppress their exhaustion. Eventually, the internal pressure cooker explodes over a trivial incident, exposing their children to sudden, confusing outbursts of rage. The exhausted employee. They take on every project, cover every late shift, and never push back on unrealistic deadlines. Their manager believes everything is fine, until the employee suddenly burns out completely, or abruptly resigns, leaving the entire team stranded. In each scenario, the nice choice did not save the dynamic, it poisoned it. By lying about your capacity, you deny the people around you the accurate data they need to navigate a real relationship with you. This is where the entire conversation must fundamentally shift. We must move away from evaluating our actions through the lens of performance-based morality, asking, am I being a good person? And start evaluating them through the lens of radical psychological honesty. Niceness is often a curated attitude designed to manage impressions. Kindness, by contrast, requires the courage to be honest, and honesty is rarely neat. It requires you to risk the temporary discomfort of a boundary, to preserve the structural integrity of the relationship. When we stop hiding behind the armor of being nice, we realize that offering a clear, firm no is not an act of hostility. It is an act of profound respect. It signals that you value the other person enough to show them who you actually are, rather than offering them a compliant caricature who will secretly resent them later. Most people think that setting a boundary is an act of aggression. They assume that a boundary is a fortress, a way of pushing people away, shutting the door and locking others out. They worry that if they establish a limit, they are destroying the connection entirely. But this is a fundamental misunderstanding. Reality dictates that a boundary is not a wall. A boundary is simply a property line. It is the vital psychological marker that defines where you end and someone else begins. Without that line, relationships do not become closer, they become dangerously blurred. To understand how you navigate the world, you must look at how you manage your personal property line. In psychology, personal boundaries generally fall into three distinct categories. Weak boundaries. These lines are porous, diffuse, and easily trampled. If you have weak boundaries, you absorb the moods of everyone around you, like an emotional sponge. You say yes when you mean no, sacrifice your values to keep others comfortable, and allow other people's expectations to dictate your life. You have no structural definition. Rigid boundaries. These lines are the actual walls. Out of a deep fear of being hurt, exploited, or controlled, you shut everyone out completely. You do not ask for help. You keep an extreme emotional distance, and you reject closeness before anyone else can reject you. While weak boundaries offer no protection, rigid boundaries offer no connection. You are safe, but entirely isolated. Healthy boundaries. This is the ideal middle ground. Healthy boundaries function less like brick walls and more like a door with a lock that you control. They are firm enough to protect your time, energy, and values, but flexible enough to let genuine love and intimacy pass through. You can say no to a request while still staying emotionally close to the person asking. The chronic pleaser struggles with boundaries because they suffer from a severe confusion regarding emotional property rights. They have never been taught the law of emotional responsibility. To break the addiction to approval, you must draw a sharp, uncompromising line down the center of your relationships and get radically clear on what belongs on each side. You are responsible for your actions, your choices, your boundaries, your words, your values, and your emotional regulation. You are not responsible for everyone else's emotions, their reactions, their disappointment, their discomfort, or their happiness. When you tell someone no, and they respond with anger, silent treatment, or a guilt trip, your phony response will scream that you have done something wrong. It will tell you that you are responsible for fixing their frustration, but their reaction belongs entirely on their side of the property line. Their disappointment is a reflection of their own internal expectations, their own entitlement, or their own inability to handle a limit. It is not a sign that your boundary was a mistake. It is simply proof that the boundary was necessary. You are allowed to let them sit with their own discomfort without rushing over the line to rescue them. A boundary does not destroy a relationship, it saves it. True intimacy is only possible when two distinct human beings meet as separate entities. If you raise your property lines out of fear, you disappear. And the relationship where one person has completely disappeared is not a connection. It is just an echo chamber of compliance. By defining where you end, you finally give the people in your life the chance to see, respect, and love the person you actually are. It is perhaps the heaviest, most sobering realization of adulthood. Sometimes you will do everything right. You will choose your words with exquisite care. You will explain your boundary calmly, kindly, and perfectly, and they will still look at you and think that you are selfish. You can provide the context, you can show your love, and you can offer the deepest respect, but you must face a brutal psychological reality. You cannot control how other people interpret you. The chronic pleaser operates under the frantic assumption that if they can just explain themselves one more time, the other person will finally understand and grant them permission to say no. This trap is amplified by the several psychological biases. The spotlight effect. We trapped ourselves into believing that others are hyper-focusing on our internal motives with a fair analytical eye. In reality, they are viewing us through the lens of their own immediate convenience. The fundamental attribution error. When you say no, the other person is highly likely to attribute your boundary to a permanent flaw in your character, thinking they are selfish and uncaring, rather than accurately attributing it to your situation, knowing they are simply exhausted and out of time. The negativity bias. Even if you have given them 100 yeses in the past, their brain is wired to hyper-focus on this single, uncomfortable no. The one refusal completely overrides a lifetime of compliance. When you try to micromanage their interpretation, you are engaging in a losing battle against human psychology. They are not looking at your boundary objectively. They are looking at it through the lens of their own disappointment. For decades, you have lived like a mirror, You checked your reflection in the faces of others to see if you were allowed to feel like a good person. If they frowned, you shattered. To heal, you must stop looking at their reaction as a mirror that measures your worth and start looking at it as a window that reveals their character. When you state a reasonable boundary and someone calls you selfish, cruel, or cold, they are not giving you accurate feedback about your morality. They are simply revealing their own entitlement. They are telling you that they preferred you when you were compliant because your lack of boundaries made their life easier. Accepting this truth requires a profound grieving process. It means letting go of the desperate fantasy that you can walk through this life completely unscathed by disapproval. Being misunderstood is often the price of authenticity. If you are going to live a life that is genuinely yours, you must develop the stomach to be misjudged. You must accept that, to some people, your growth will look like betrayal, your health will look like hostility, your sanity will look like selfishness. Let them think it. Let them talk. You cannot build a home inside their distorted perception of you. The moment you accept that you are allowed to be the villain in someone else's story is the exact moment you finally break out of the prison and become the author of your own. When you begin to set boundaries and emphasize no, others lose free access to you. They might never celebrate your growth, especially predatory exploiters. Instead, they may call you selfish, arrogant, prideful, changed, or cold. This is the ultimate test of a recovery. They will look at your new boundaries and accuse you of becoming a worse of human being. But in reality, you have not become worse. You have simply become unavailable for exploitation. This is the precise moment where many people quit. They manage to state the boundary, they survive the initial confrontation, but they crumble under the weight of the labels thrown at them. When a parent says, "You've changed, you don't care about this family anymore," or a partner says, "You used to be so supportive, now you are just cold," the old fawning response flares up. The primitive tribal brain panics, screaming that you are being cast out into the wilderness. It is incredibly difficult to stand firm when the people you love rewrite your character to suit their narrative. It requires you to navigate a massive, painful identity shift. To survive this stage, you must consciously transition from your assigned role to your authentic self. From the good child to the sovereign adult. You stop seeking parental permission to live your own life. From the fixer to the observer. You allow other people to experience the natural consequences of their own choices without stepping in to rescue them. From the mirror to the solid object. You stop changing your shape based on who is standing in front of you. You have spent a lifetime letting others define your identity based on how useful you are to them. When you change the rules, you must accept that their description of you will change too. They will cast you as the villain in their story because, in their story, the main character is entitled to your absolute compliance. Becoming the villain in someone else's story does not mean you have actually become a bad person. It means you have finally acquired a backbone. It means your yes actually carries weight because you are finally capable of delivering a no. When you accept the role of the villain in an unhealthy dynamic, you strip the other person of their leverage. When they call you selfish, you no longer scramble to prove your selflessness. You simply take a breath, let the label land, and realize their disapproval cannot actually kill you. The ancient ghost of the tribe has lost its power. You are standing on your own property line, looking out at the world, completely free. Many personal growth books offer a beautiful lie. They promise that once you learn to set boundaries, the anxiety will vanish, the fear will evaporate, and you will step into a life of effortless confidence. That is a dangerous myth. The reality is far more uncomfortable. The guilt never fully disappears. When you say no to a demanding parent, a manipulative friend, or an exploitative boss, that cold, heavy knot will still form in your chest. Your stomach will sink. The goal of healing is not to become a fearless, bulletproof machine who never feels bad. The goal is not confidence. The goal is courage. In mainstream psychology, people often try to fight their guilt. They argue with it, rationalize it away, or use positive affirmations to drown it out. But trying to force yourself to feel calm before you take action is a trap. It ensures you remain paralyzed. Your nervous system has decades of training telling it that boundaries are dangerous. This is where we must look to acceptance and commitment therapy. ECT introduces a concept known as psychological flexibility, the ability to stay in contact with the present moment, including uncomfortable thoughts and emotions, and to change or persist in behavior based on what truly matters to you. Instead of fighting the guilt, psychological flexibility asks you to make room for it. You stop trying to manipulate your internal weather. You accept that the guilt is simply an old automated reflex left over from your childhood conditioning and your tribal ancestry. It is noise, not news. It is an echo of the past, not a reflection of your current reality. When you stop waiting for the guilt to disappear, you can finally transition to value-based living. In the grip of the approval addiction, your behavior was driven entirely by experiential avoidance, doing whatever it took to avoid the pain of conflict or disapproval. In value-based living, you accept the pain as the price of admission for a meaningful life. You choose your actions based on your deeply held core values, not your immediate emotional comfort. When your value is honesty, you tell your partner you cannot take on another chore, feeling the sharp sting of guilt, but knowing that resentment will destroy the relationship. When your value is self-respect, you walk away from a toxic dynamic, carrying the heavy weight of being called cold, because you refuse to abandon yourself anymore. When your value is autonomy, you choose a career path your parents despise, enduring their icy silence, because living a lie is a far worse fate than enduring their disapproval. Healing does not mean you stop feeling the sinking feeling in your stomach. Healing means you notice the sinking feeling, you acknowledge it, and you say no anyway. You learn to walk forward while carrying your discomfort like a heavy backpack. The backpack is there, it is heavy, and it is tiring, but it no longer dictates your direction. You no longer need to be free of guilt to be free of the prison. The moment you allow yourself to feel guilt without rushing to fix it is the exact moment you reclaim your life. You are finally willing to pay the emotional tax of being an authentic human being. This brings us to a stark reality. Every meaningful life disappoints someone. It is the entry fee for individuality. If you look out at your life and realize that absolutely everyone around you is perfectly satisfied, smiling, and completely comfortable with every single one of your choices, you must pause. You must ask yourself what you traded to secure that total harmony. If everyone is happy with your choices, there is a very good chance that none of those choices were truly yours. You have simply built a monument to their expectations while letting your own life collapse inside it. The sinking feeling in your stomach may never completely vanish. The ancient ghost of the tribe may still whisper that danger is near whenever you stand your ground, but you are no longer a child in a cave, and you no longer need permission to take up space. Look at the guilt, say your no, and finally step out into a life that belongs entirely to you. Perhaps the strongest prisons are not built from iron bars, but from expectations, not the expectations others place upon us, but the ones we accept without question. A life can be surrendered, one compromise at a time, so quietly that it never feels like surrender at all, until one day you look in the mirror and find yourself wearing a face everyone recognizes, except your own. The freedom to disappoint others is not the freedom to be cruel. It is the freedom to finally become someone whose life is authored from within. Because every life lived honestly will disappoint someone. The only question is whether that someone will always be you.